Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Business Growth Show, where we talk about all components of business and how to utilize them for exponential growth. My name is Athin Cassiotis. I'm a serial entrepreneur, international speaker, result strategist, business coach, mentor, and consultant. Today, I have an awesome guest. He is a leadership, communication, and emotional intelligence executive coach, Columbia University professor, best-selling author, radio show host, professional public speaker, and Mountaineer. He is the former head of global marketing at Bloomberg and the industry leader in executive training with Fortune 500 companies. He is the founder of Climb Leadership International and coaches executives on leadership development, public speaking, and emotional intelligence with his Climb Leadership Institute. His clients include Bloomberg, Bank of China, and JP Morgan, in addition to other large and complex financial institutions worldwide. He is a professional speaker and has given keynotes in over 20 countries, an Amazon best-selling author and talk radio host called A Climb to the Top, Stories of Transformation. He has inspired the world to successfully reach greater heights personally and professionally. Everyone give a very big welcome to Chuck Garcia, and thank you for being on my show.
Oh, Athin, it's a pleasure. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. It is great to be here.
You're very welcome, mate. I'm sure it's going to be awesome for everyone watching and listening today. So you're a very successful entrepreneur. So for those people who don't know who you are, just please introduce yourself by telling us about you and your journey.
Yeah, I'd appreciate that. Well, just let me get the entrepreneur over with. And I think it's best we establish what that is because it means different things to different people. Often when we think of entrepreneurs, I know there is a bit of a consideration that something has been invented. Whereas in my case, unlike inventing an app or something you can point to, my entrepreneurial journey did not start that way. My company is a professional services company where after 25 years on Wall Street, I decided I don't need to do that Wall Street life anymore, but I want to continue to teach what it is people saw me do. And in my Wall Street career, as I ascended, the ascension came not from necessarily my technical competence. It came from most of my career I spent on a stage in the service of my companies doing speaking engagements all around the world with the objective of actually selling the company I represented. And I found, though, over the years, as you begin to change and you think about what else do you want in your life, I didn't want to leave the Wall Street world behind, but I made a very conscious, strategic, and intentional decision that I could form my own company and actually drive value by creating Climb Leadership, a company which is really rooted in training people to do what I did for my many years on Wall Street, which is really the intersection of teaching people to be better public speakers, teaching them and helping them develop a greater level of emotional intelligence. And if you put the two of them together, what you're really doing is training an executive on a greater sense of presence. So what I found is my career evolved almost by self-taught. I didn't know a coach even existed. I said, maybe I could do this. And so it gave birth to this entrepreneurial spirit, which I didn't necessarily think I either had or wanted something to do. But I think for our listeners, many will find as your career evolves and you begin to think differently about yourself, about the world, about how you make money, about how you can contribute. In my case, it would never going to be anything that I could invent, but it could be something that is incredibly important to other people by which I could claim some sense of expertise and actually get paid to do it.
Yeah, love that, mate. Really powerful. I love that distinction. And yeah, it's awesome to be able to pass the knowledge on. And I'm sure with all that experience, there's just so much gold that you're giving to all of these people and their companies. So firstly, let's change the channel slightly. And I want to talk about you being a mountaineer, which I think is amazing, right? Where you've climbed some of the world's, tallest peaks, so do you want to maybe share where have you climbed and how has that helped you in life and business?
Yeah, and well, I appreciate you bringing that up quickly because it's become such a critical, important part of my life and also of my brand. The journey began unfortunately, through a series of events that were quite sad. And on 9/11, on that day, that fateful day, I was scheduled to speak on the 107th floor of the World Trade Center. What many people came to find out that on that fateful day, at the very top of one of the towers was an event space called Windows of the World. And I had spoken there many times before. And there was an organization based in London that would put on conferences all over the world. And that happened to be their day, that on 9/11, 2001, they had an event where they expected around 250 people to come. I was originally scheduled to speak at 9:30 that morning. But about 2 months before the event, a friend of mine called. He had the 3 o'clock spot. I had the 9:30. He asked, he was in a jam. He said, "Do you mind if I switch?" And he was at a very large investment bank at the time. So Athin, as fate would have it, at that very moment, that decision to change, unfortunately, I lost my friend, but it kept me alive. And yet on that day, scheduled to speak at 3 o'clock that afternoon, many of my colleagues from Bloomberg were already in the building. And they, unfortunately, by the time I was heading to the World Trade Center, I didn't make it into the building. The buildings had collapsed, but I had lost many of my friends. I state that because it was that event, and I didn't know it at the time. But as I considered, that wasn't my day to die. I don't know why that was, but I couldn't sit around and think about why it was. As long as I was here, what could I do? Can I do something different? How do I honor the spirit of my lost friends and colleagues? And I subsequently attended 16 funerals and memorial services from that day forward. And it never ended, and it never left my mind. So Athin, on that day, I made that conscious decision. If I'm here, I'm going to think differently about what I'm going to do each day. And perhaps I can honor the spirit of my loved ones where I can't change what happened, but perhaps I can change myself. And I gave a lot of introspection and said, maybe I should just go do something that I've never done that can be very difficult and very challenging, but maybe I'll learn something about myself. And I grew up in a place in Four Seasons. I learned how to ski and skate from the time I was a little kid. And just before 9/11, I read a book called Into Thin Air by a guy named John Krakauer. And I didn't have any illusions that I was going to climb a mountain. But what happened was a confluence of the events. I had recently finished the book, and it really sparked my interest in mountaineering. And then when the event occurred, that book was still in my mind. So Athin, to make a very long story, trying to make it shorter, on 9/11/02, I went on my first mountain expedition in the Cascades Mountains in Washington State in the US, and I stepped on the summit of Mount Rainier, which is a pretty big, bold mountain for someone who had never climbed a mountain. And what I learned about myself. I learned that I could honor the spirit of others through some weird, whimsical way. That was the only way I knew how. And I stepped on the summit and I gave reflections and I said, oh my God, I loved what I did. And I said, I'm going to keep doing this. And a year later, I climbed Kilimanjaro. And a year later, I climbed the Matterhorn. And then I kept climbing in the Andes in Alaska, and then in the Caucasus Mountains in Russia. And before I knew it, Athin, I was like, oh my God, I don't know whatever force led me to do this. This has become an incredible part of my life as I am honored and privileged to be led up mountains by other people. When I came down from a mountain in Alaska called Mount Bona in 2012, that's when I knew it. I was like, this is it. This is my time. Climbing that mountain, it was a metaphor for our lives. We formed teams. We took a step at a time. We climbed into the unknown. We didn't know what was ahead of us. We couldn't predict the weather, just like life. So it was on that mountain where I made the conscious decision. I'm going to start my own company. And here's, Athin, my biggest transformation. From here on in, from this day forward, I am a mountain guide. It may not be on a physical mountain, but I'm going to wake up every day in the service of someone else's success. And I'm going to help guide them up their mountain. And those mountains are going to be hard and bold and beautiful and challenging and unlike anything that ever done before. And hence that gave birth to the name of my company, Climb Leadership. I wrote a book called The Climb to the Top. It's really using the metaphor of mountaineering, or mountaineering as a metaphor for career climbing, where the backpack is not an ice axe, crampons, or anything you would associate with physically climbing a mountain. The backpack then are the communication techniques that I had developed over many years of public speaking, that I could now lead people up the proverbial executive mountain with the tools that I built myself, where people watched me and witnessed me in the evolution of my career climb through the use of communication skills. So everything then came about. My projects are We're Climbing a Mountain. My book is a mountain climb. My radio show called A Climb to the Top. Everything became in that metaphor. And also as a business person, as a business growth show, I had a brand identification. So everything I do either moves the brand or it moves revenue, or both. And hence the Mountaineer and ChuckGarcia.com is all about mountaineering. I hope that took a little while, but I hope that clarified how I came to this wonderful accident.
Yeah, no, I love that, mate. Thank you so much for sharing that, Chuck. And obviously challenging times for everybody around the world. But, I think whatever the challenge comes up in life, I think you just did it well, is how can I change? What can I do that's different from that point onwards? And I love, the journey, just hearing that from you. I think everybody would be like, wow, I love how you just took it, the bull by the horns, so to speak, and go, you know what, I'm going to make something of this. And it's a testament, to where you are today and the impact you're having in the world.
Thank you. And I want to add that, we're all each other's teachers and we all learn from each other. And there's something that's been in my head for many years when I thought about the events of 9/11, and everybody had a response to where you were that day, what you did about it. And I think this is something for all of us just to ponder the words of wisdom from the great psychologist Carl Jung, who once said, and I don't remember where I read this, but it really stuck out at me. It said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." And as I thought about, the tears, and we lost so many friends, and New York was a very difficult, or the world was a difficult place on 9/11. We all felt that, everyone around the world. But to me, I had to think about, and it prompted me. And I also think, did I need that tragedy to change? Well, I didn't. But it did happen, and maybe it happened for me, not to me. Maybe I needed that in my life to wake up and to determine that from here on in, am I going to go to work in the service of my own success? Well, I had a lot of good fortune, and I had a really good career, and I had wonderful provided for my family, traveled around the world doing not necessarily what I thought I was going to do. I never thought I'd be this public speaker. I wasn't very good at it. I just happened to be better than many other people in my company. So I got the job. Once I got the job, though, I said, oh my God, nobody ever taught me this stuff. I better figure it out. And I did. And as I did and I got better at it, then I really began to think, oh, maybe I can make a career of this. So that event, Athin, was really the confluence of tragedy, opportunity, preparation, these things that you can't necessarily predict are going to happen, but you want to be ready when they do. And I think that's the advice I often give myself, that I try to proffer to anyone listening. You don't always know what it is you're preparing for. You can't possibly predict that. But there are a set of skills that I think everybody can employ and deploy. And those are those soft skills, the communications, the emotional intelligence. We need them in every aspect of our life. But nobody in college told me that. It was just cram, exam, take a test, and the smartest guy will have a path to prosperity. Yet when these tragedies occur, it's not like that at all. We're measuring our lives on the people we touch, the communities we build. It has nothing to do with brilliance, academic achievement, all those things that I thought were going to be critical on the climb to my top. I completely, Athin, redefined and reinvented what it meant to be successful based on those events.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for adding that. And yeah, Carl Jung is awesome with the shadow self. And, you know, one thing just to add to that you said that I think is a really powerful short way is the same reason why you won't can be the same reason why you will. So Chuck could have gone, you know what, that's it. I'm just going to relax and mope for the rest of my life. Unlikely, right? Knowing Chuck, but some people may do that, right? You know, and then, but I can be like, you know what, this is the catalyst for me, like Chuck, you know, for me to make a change, right? So whatever comes up in our lives, I think that's a key thing that we need to all be thinking about is what can I do to make this happen, make this work for me in every situation, even if it seems bad. There's always something that we can do positively from it at the time. So I love that, Chuck. That's really powerful there. And, you know, you obviously worked at Bloomberg for 14 years in sales and marketing. If everybody that's like a software/media company does a lot of different things, Bloomberg, in a variety of leadership positions. So do you want to maybe just share like how that helped you, I guess, in learning, being on the job and teaching as well, probably leadership, you know, from being in that experience?
Yeah, no, that is a really good way of looking at it, because what I didn't realize, and I think as I ascended in what was a small company at the time, there were less than 200 employees. And when you join a small company that grows into a behemoth in its industry, whether you're good at it or not, if you're still around and opportunities present themselves, someone is going to be promoted into a job that you have no experience doing. And as I thought about, I did very well in my first sales jobs there. Well, what do you do with good salespeople? You promote them to become sales manager. And then what do you do if they're good at sales management? You promote them into another position. And the ironic part is no one teaches you that stuff. You just learn that on the job. You could read all the books and listen to all the theories in the world, but the human spirit is incredibly confounding and unpredictable. And anybody who thinks they can learn to lead from a book is sadly mistaken. So I think in my case, it was just the good fortune of being in a small company that all of a sudden was getting bigger and more hierarchical and more matrix-like, where opportunities occurred for my own promotions. And I think a lot of my leadership experience, Athin, was really based on just my own reflections. If I were to choose to follow somebody, not if necessarily somebody said, hey, Chuck, here's your boss. He could be a great guy, she, whoever, it could be a total jerk. But I think all of us have the opportunity to decide what kind of leader do we want to be? And I looked at, as I was ascending in the organization, what kind of leader do I want to be? I didn't know. Nobody says that to you. We didn't have professional development programs that enabled us to characterize ourselves. So I thought about the people I look up to: Winston Churchill, Nelson Mandela. Those are the great iconic leaders that I read about for years and I admired. And I said, what do they bring? Well, they are exceptional communicators. Okay, I need to work on that. You look at Nelson Mandela, extraordinary levels of emotional intelligence. Just the way that he could connect with people was unlike anything I'd ever read about or even seen in the movies when you see about him. So I think what I learned is, and I didn't know it at the time, but many people had told me in my years of leadership, wow, you just lead by example. You're teaching us without us knowing we're being taught. And I didn't know that. I didn't think that. I was just trying to succeed and make a bucket of money for my company because that's how you succeed. Yet, as I was getting feedback from people who were in my purview, I said, wow, well, I don't think it's coming naturally, but at least I'm learning from that because I've decided what are the characteristics that I want to embody as a leader, if for no other reason, because I followed somebody who taught me those things. So I hoped that through the years as I ascended, that stuff would just pass down. It would run downhill. And if somebody noticed me behaving in a certain way, that person would sometimes not imitate, but mirror the way that I treated them. And then if somebody down the chain saw that, they would begin to mirror each other. And before you know it, that's culture. When you have a confluence of people behaving in a certain way and you integrate competence, character, and the way we treat each other. That's the culture I've always strived for. Being good at what you do is a third. Aligning your words and actions, that's your character. That's the other third. And then the last third, the way you make people feel, a critical component in leadership. Because every day they have to think about, when I come in, what am I working to do? Not disappoint the boss, make the boss happy, inspire, whatever that may be. So I thought about, Athin, all of those characteristics: competence, character, the way you treat other people. That's what I glommed onto. I need to be that. And once I decided that, I was very conscious because I was in a visible position. People saw me all the time. I'm on camera all the time. Okay, that's cool. It's got to be authentic. That's what I want to be. And every day I strove to live up to those pillars. And hence, when I decided to form my own company, people knew me. They'd watched me. They'd collaborated with me. It was, I don't want to say it was easy out of the gate, but I had built a credibility and a network that I thought would value what it is I had to offer and started hiring me.
Yeah, love that, mate. Really powerful. Loved all those little traits there. And I guess, if we change it up a little bit, because a lot of people talk about all these awesome things that happen in companies, right? But I'm sure that there's a lot of issues, right, that people probably aren't aware of. And that's why somebody like you comes in and goes in there. So what are some of the biggest leadership issues you see in the companies that you're working with?
Yeah, and what you're describing is the necessity to be able to do some kind of assessment when I come into a company, and it's born out of either helping somebody to do something better. And here's the interesting part, Athin. The other half of what I do, helping them to stop doing something. That's a really interesting leadership project you have when you're either accelerating or helping someone to decelerate. And by that, I mean what we look for. Let me divide it into two parts then. Often I am hired to help somebody who has been promoted on the strength of his or her technical competence. And unfortunately, or for better or for worse, the job description is very different. Not unlike in the military, you have a soldier who is very good on the battlefield. And what do? They elevate him to general. Generals aren't on the battlefield. They become diplomats. It's a job of diplomacy. So the thing that got them there is not the thing that gets them to the next level. And it's very similar in the Wall Street world. The skills that got them halfway up the mountain are not the skills that will get them the rest of the way up to the mountain. The rest of the way is very soft skill driven. The temperament, the ability to keep your grace under fire and not to crack under the pressure. The style, not just your substance, but your emotional intelligence style of how you make people feel when you lead. So when I have a project like that, immediately I have to assess based upon the benchmark of three things. Are they calm under pressure? Are they good at conflict resolution without making people feel all beat up and defeated? And then the third is stylistic. Do they have an empathetic style? So that's my pillars of leadership assessment based on those three things. And if they are good or could be better on any one of those three, we do several or a personality assessment to help to determine of that benchmark what comes easily, what comes less easily, and what is just damn difficult. Because those are the leadership competencies that we are trying to promote within that individual, so that this leadership thing as a learned behavior, they understand what it is they need to learn in order to be a better leader. On the other half of that, I'm often hired to, and sometimes people don't know exactly what they're asking me to do, but it's pretty clear, help that individual stop doing certain things. Stop being temperamental, Stop being short-tempered. Stop treating people like crap. Can't be arrogant. Can't be condescending. So now there's a laundry list of people who are pretty good people, but the pillar of how they treat others has been breached. And in this day and age of Twitter and social media, you can't do that anymore. You'll have a headline on yourself in the next 5 seconds. So what we really do is the assessment. Are we trying to accelerate, and what is it? Or are we decelerating something or trying to eliminate a habit or a bad maladaptive behavior? And it comes in those 2 dimensions. And they're both equally valuable because they're critical to someone's career. And either way, either dimension, if it's important to them, then it becomes critical to me. And my job is to make those assessments and determine the game plan. What are we trying to either get better, or what are we trying to stop?
Yeah, love that. Really powerful there, and great way to break that down. Really awesome. And let's talk now about emotional intelligence, right? You mentioned it a little bit here before, and a lot of people say, now these days that emotional intelligence is much more important than normal intelligence, IQ, right? EQ is a bit more important than IQ. So do you want to maybe, because maybe some people initially don't know exactly what emotional intelligence is, so maybe just explain a little bit about emotional intelligence is, and then maybe some ways about how we can become more aware and how we can have better emotional intelligence.
Yeah, let me put, before I define it, let me put into context in a more global way. For any listeners out there, if you aspire, and I'm going to give a lot of credit to the high-tech companies. I'll give Google a lot of credit for this because I think they are at the vanguard of the driving of human capital. They have instituted and often teach their employees something called the career cues. Now, just let those 2 words sit for a minute: career and the letter Q. And Q means quotient. And when we think about quotient, how we always defined smart is someone that had a high IQ. And that was measured 100 years ago in France. That was not meant as a measurement of someone's brilliance. It was actually developed to help people who had disabilities or didn't learn very well, to help them to try to figure out how do they improve their learning outcomes. Now, though, in the early 1990s, a gentleman at Harvard developed this concept in his book called Emotional Intelligence. The subtitle is called Redefining What It Means to Be Smart, or Why It Matters More Than IQ. And what he found is these social scientists started to go to work and found that a lot of leaders in the Industrial Revolution were commanding and controlling. That's how you did things back when you had a factory and you commanded people. If they made 30 widgets, you commanded them to make 40. And people were exhausted and they hated their jobs, but they needed it anyway. So that was a leadership style. As we switched into the more digital economy, leadership styles started to change, where you could no longer command somebody to make more widgets. You had to inspire them to be more creative, to do this high-tech thing, which isn't something you could necessarily touch, but it was something that was often people's work were now on computers. Thus, it gave birth to this style of leadership where it uses the pillars of emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence addresses the personal, the more introspective nature of one's personality, the emotional intelligence. How are they calm under the weight of great expectations? Are they self-aware? Do they realize the behavioral impact on others? Are they socially aware? Imagine when a leader walks into a room, one of the important learning outcomes is learning to read that room, knowing the mood of the crowd. So if they go in with a particular speech and they see the crowd is in a completely different place, the emotionally aware leader will recognize the pain, the happiness, the joy, whatever they see in their audience, and immediately begin to adjust their style. That's what emotional intelligence is. And it's the ability to be able to measure 4 pillars of who we are: self-awareness, social awareness, your relationship management, and your self-management. And the social scientist went to work being able to put empirical evidence. This is your measure on a scale of 1 to 100. It's conceivable your self-awareness is at a 70, which means it's relatively low, likely to some of the other pillars. What's the most fascinating part is emotional intelligence gave birth to a series of other, what they now call career cues: the adaptability quotient, a creativity quotient, a cultural quotient, a positivity quotient. Think about all these things that are now being measured. It's wonderful to see this evolution because these soft skills, no longer can one claim they're abstract, woo-woo, this fluffy, fuzzy thing. To the contrary, when you look at a leader, you look on one hand at their competence, at their substance. Then at the other hand, you look at their style. The style is what people see. The style is what people feel. The style is what we hear, and it's what we talk about at the bar when you're talking about the speech that leader just gave. You're not talking about what he said or she said. You're talking about how they made you feel. So that then, if we just combine all of these cues, they have become a driving force in helping a leader to bring empirical evidence. Here is the measurement on any of the cues, with EQ being at the forefront of this movement. And if we can help leaders to become more emotionally aware when they need to connect and move an audience or employees to their cause, people don't move to the cause because of facts. They move to a cause because they feel connected to something bigger than them. And that is the critical component of EQ, because the good leaders help people believe that you investing in this cause that I'm describing is bigger than you, and you are going to work hard in the service of the cause. Does that make sense?
Sure does, mate. That was powerful. Love that. Thank you. And I loved all the other, the quotients there. Really powerful, because I haven't, been aware or delved into those. And I think, what gets measured gets managed, right? That's a standard saying. So
exactly,
any type of measurement we can do, we know where we are, where we're moving towards. And for someone like you to make people aware of this and help them to improve is invaluable, in all the different areas.
And there's one other thing, Ethan, I do want to, it's important that I get this out, because everyone who's listening, whether you're in Australia or the US or anywhere in between, the business community around the world is now very LinkedIn dependent. That is our social media, so to speak, place we go for networking. And every year, LinkedIn publishes a top 10 hard skill list demanded by employers. And they're what you'd expect. They're looking for artificial intelligence, cloud computing, those kinds of skills that are demanded in this century. But the interesting part is they also publish what are the top 10 soft skills that appear on more job descriptions than anything else. And I want our listeners, if you've got a pen, write this down, because what this is speaking to is what the market value is demanding from you beyond your technical competence. And interestingly enough, when you read the list, the number one thing they're looking for is creativity. Who knew? You don't major in creativity. In fact, they usually associate that with artists, musicians. But I was a finance major. You too are a business person. Creativity, who teaches you that? Number one, that's what employers want, because that's your differentiation factor. Number two, persuasion. Right out of Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Because even if you're an engineer, and at Columbia, I teach this to the engineers, and they say, oh my God, we need to be persuasive. You want $1 million to fund the next Tesla? You're going to persuade someone to give you the $1 million for your engineering feat. Number three, adaptability. AQ, they are measuring. Google measures the adaptability quotient. Who knew? They need their employees to be adaptable in a world of massive disruption. Number four, collaboration. Actually, they go 3 and 4. They need you to collaborate well. They actually put that on a job description. It's not enough to be good at what you do. You have to be good with other people. And then number 5, the last one, if you go to those, Number 5 speaks to me, Athin. Emotional intelligence is number 5, and it keeps getting higher up on the list. So think about the amalgam of these 5 different skill sets. Not what I expected when I came into my career 35 years ago. Nobody told me that. Just keep working harder. Terrible advice. Work harder. No, work smarter. Look at what the marketplace is telling anyone coming out of college. Creativity, number 1, it can be taught. Who knew? And I think that is for leaders like you and me, I think many of the others, even if you're not consciously carrying the mountain backpack with that skill set, I think it's important that we promote how critical it has become and a reflection of how the world has changed and what employers expect from their employees in this day and age.
Yeah, love it, mate. Really powerful there, really deep stuff. And I'm sure hopefully everybody did write notes, as Chuck said there, right? Because this is gold information. And, and one little thing that I'd probably add about creativity is see how you can get creative in your life. It doesn't necessarily have to be in your role in business initially, is outside of things. Can you do something where you go do a dance class or something like that, or go do some singing, or, something that just gets you out of your comfort zone and you can be a bit creative, right? Because I think that's, just working the muscle a little bit. And then eventually you'll be able to adapt that into different things. This is something that I've done myself. I've just realized, over the years, and that's helped me in business. And I think find something that, just puts you outside of that zone as well, right?
And I think one of the things I do, I never thought I would do this, and I've never taken an acting class until I use the art of improvisation in my leadership training, because what I found early on in my practice in client leadership, we were very good at getting people to step up on stage and to speak in front of a camera or testimony in Congress, whatever that is. So when it was prepared, they were pretty good at it. But even myself, I found in my leadership roles as a public speaker, I wasn't as good on my feet. When people asked me questions, I'd stumble and bumble and stupid filler words and verbal crutches as I was trying to respond to a question that I didn't know an answer to. So part of the creativity as communicators, I immediately took I read a book called Yes and, which is the book. It's really the principles of the second city in Chicago that went on to train many of the great comedians of the world and many of the good actors. And then I had somebody teach me the art and science of improvisation, where the muscle that you just referenced, the mind muscle, becomes more adaptable when you learn to condition your responses in an environment of uncertainty. So when you're asked a question that you don't know, instead of and bumbling on it, they teach you to breathe, take 2 to 3 seconds, let them wait. Instead of saying and you've now given yourself a couple seconds to be able to respond in a way that is clear. Because in most responses, people don't remember what you said. They simply remember how you chose to respond. Was it with conviction? I don't know what he said, but God, I like the way he said it. Or was it poorly, just described in a way that made no sense? Well, there's a middle ground. And the creativity in communication comes from improvisation. If you had told me that 10, 15 years ago, I said, nah, that's for actors. We're all actors. It's all a stage. Yeah. Life is business. One big act of improvisation.
Sure is, mate. I love that. Really powerful. And I think this is the power of podcast, right? Like, when you're a good podcaster person, and whether you've got your own podcast or radio show like us here, or even if you just go on other people's podcasts, if you don't have one, I love it. And I don't know, you're probably the same, Chuck, is like, don't tell me the questions beforehand. I'd rather you tell me at the time, because it works the muscle. Some people that are new might be like, can you send me the questions? Because they're a little bit there, but it's put yourself out there more to use that creativity, use that improvisation at the time. And the more you do it, the better you'll get, like anything, right?
Yeah, no, indeed. I'm the same way. In fact, I prefer the spontaneity because what I find is if you come in over prepared, it's all stilted. And yet for us, for you, you had years of being an entrepreneur. You understand the criticality of being able to think on your feet because that's what you're really getting paid to do. Anybody can write a business plan. And most people and many of the great business people I've had on my own podcast, they'll tell you the business plan, yeah, it's okay. You have to have one. Somebody wants to see what you're thinking. But the reality is it never survives the first day. The adjustments begin immediately. And so it is when we communicate to other people. You can come in with a great speech. And if they ask you a question that you handled terribly, you diminish the entire capacity of the 3-week speech you spent preparing. So instead, if we just lighten up a little bit, take the pressure off the need to be perfect on the speech, and just allow the space for the spontaneity, my goodness, even when I gave myself permission to screw up, I just got better. And when I coach and teach people, particularly my Columbia students who feel they need to be perfect all the time because that's the standard, I love the standard. But there are times we need to take a step back for 2 steps forward. And that's allowing ourselves the forgiveness to be able to screw up when we're improvising, because that's how you get better. And if you can do that, you get pretty good at this stuff.
Definitely. Love that, mate. So powerful there. And let's talk a bit about your Amazon best-selling book now. I Climbed to the Top. It's been translated into Chinese and has been used to train the Bank of China executives on Western leadership and communication methods, which is awesome as well. So do you want to maybe share a little bit about the book and, what we'll get out of it?
Yeah, in the book was written, it was the businessman in me, not just the passionate mountaineer. But when I started Climb Leadership and I started teaching college, what I found is I didn't have a calling card. I didn't have a brand necessarily. And also for the way that I taught all of the communication tactics that I had developed over the years, I needed something to catalog them. So in this case, very simple. Necessity was the mother of invention. It's like, I need to write a book. I'd never written a book. I wrote a master's thesis in college that one professor read. I had no idea what impact it was. So that became a mountain to me. I'm going to do, in fact, my whole second career is doing things I'd never done before. Could I write a book? Sure. Anybody can write a book. Is it any good? Well, that's different. So I thought about what would be my calling card and what would I call it? It was when I came down from that mountain in Alaska where that whole brand of a climb to the top, because sometimes you don't get there, or sometimes you do and you find another mountain and you get to the climb to that top. For all of those who are not going to be on a physical mountain, how do I help them climb to the top of their career? I don't know what their top is. You define it. But what I do know, if I can help you to communicate better, whether you're an engineer, doctor, lawyer, banker, construction worker, it doesn't matter. Irrespective of your technical competence, as human beings, when you layer in the left brain, your technical competence, that means half of your brain is not working. And that's where communication, emotional intelligence, and collaboration come in. So I thought the best thing that I can do, if I write a book, and I took 5 months off to write it, and I wrote it a little bit every day, and it was a joy. It was a breeze because I wrote what I knew. But I wanted it to be not just communication tactics. I wanted to plant the mindset that you're on a mountain and it's hard and it's unpredictable. And you got to be skilled to be on it, but you have no idea what's going to happen when you start the journey. So what do you rely on? The framework of the book is called the 10 Commandments of Great Communicators. And each chapter is a commandment. So I wrote it with 10 commandments. I thought that's something in the Christian world we understand. US, Australia, UK, the English-speaking world tends to be more Christian because we came from the English that brought the religion with them. So the Christian in me said, I get 10 commandments. It's an easy number. Each commandment describes a different tactic for how you communicate. So chapter 1 is called the primacy recency effect, the observation that no matter what you say, and in the United States, we speak at a rate of 125 words every minute, they won't remember what you said, but it's the observation they're likely to remember the first thing you said and the last thing you said. Primacy, recency. So when you begin a speech, make the opening big and bold. Make the closing big and bold. Won't remember much in between, but they'll remember how you make them feel. Chapter 2, the power of emotional appeal. I did case studies on great leaders, Nelson Mandela, Winston Churchill, my heroes. I don't remember everything they said, but I remember how they made me feel, the emotional appeal of how they led. Chapter 8, called The Power of the Pause. What I just did right now on the radio, so that I'm not speaking 100 miles an hour. We do that to allow absorption in the listener and to allow me as the speaker to catch up to what it is I'm going to say next, so that I avoid like, and so. Each of the chapters then were the tools, Athin, that I used as I developed my own career. What can I put in the backpack? I'm going to put in the backpack the things that I know, and I'm going to teach people what to put in their pack when they are preparing them for a speech. Hence, A Climb to the Top. The subtitle is called Communications and Leadership Tactics to Take Your Career to New Heights. It was based on the premise that no matter your profession, if you learn to communicate well, you will continue to evolve and climb in your mountain, because that is what leadership is. And what I found in the case studies as I was interviewing many people for the book, it was clear, and I used different professions. The average, when I asked each person who was interviewed in the book, how important was communications in their evolution, the average among all of them, it was 65% of their success was based on their ability to communicate. Hence, the book was born. I wrote it. I had a great editor. Next thing I know, I'm getting hired by China, and they said, could you put it into Chinese for all of the Chinese who are coming west? What are the Western leadership practices that we tend to value? Communication being a big one. It's typically not a part of their conventional education, so that's good. We can add on to it. And hence, I'm just so blessed because people get the metaphor. I'd like to think it's a pretty good book. We've sold thousands of copies and continue to do so. I put it on an audiobook, so if you like my voice, you might like the book. If you hate my voice, read the book. So it's just been a joy. And as the business person, I wanted to leverage it into several mediums.
Yeah, love it, Chuck. It sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to be delving into that very soon.
I appreciate that.
Awesome, mate. So it's been so much value and everything today. It's been a pleasure. And as we're, I guess, starting to wrap up, what one key piece of advice would you give to all the entrepreneurs watching and listening today?
Yeah, I think all of us, don't be afraid to screw up, to make mistakes, to fail. I think you're all too hard on yourself, thinking that you have to be perfect. That's my first piece of advice. Just learn from them. The growth comes in the struggle, and you learn a lot more from what you screw up than the things you do perfectly. And then the second thing I will say, it's the way we treat each other. That many of the entrepreneurs, they're brilliant. They invent really cool things, and I get it. If communication or emotional intelligence, even if you make the admission, well, that's not for me, build around yourself. Find people who are good at it. Steve Jobs needed Steve Wozniak. Everybody needs someone else. You don't have to carry the burden of all of these things, but I think every organization should commit to try to find left brain people, right brain people. For those that can't, for an individual that doesn't feel I can do all of those things, organizations can, and they are the components of people who are very good at the technical competence, people who are of stellar character, and the way we make people feel, the way we treat them. Those are the pillars to the entrepreneurs. Don't forget them along the way. People will not buy your brilliance. They will buy why you do what you do, the Simon Sinek, the why, but also they'll never forget how you make them feel. And if you make them feel good about your cause, they will gravitate to you. If you insult them and make them feel bad, they won't. Yeah, amazing words there. Lap it up. So yeah, we connected through our networks where I learned about your awesome journey from, being a 25-year veteran on Wall Street,
having spent 14 years in sales and marketing at Bloomberg in a variety of leadership positions, being an investment manager at BlackRock Solutions and Citadel as well, to also obviously being a mountaineer, having climbed some of the world's tallest peaks, as you've mentioned today. You're changing the leadership game with Climb Leadership from the top down, which is awesome. You're an awesome guy, and I'm sure you'll continue to make a massive difference in creating better leaders and companies globally. So I'm very grateful that we connected, and I look forward to working with you in the future, Chuck. So how can people find you, get in contact with you?
Yeah, I think the best way, certainly chuckgarcia.com is my website. If you go to LinkedIn and you type in Chuck Garcia, you will see my picture. And there's only one of there's a bunch of Charles Garcias out there, but you'll find me. You can follow us on Instagram, but my preference is, and the others, I'm a business guy. I'm on LinkedIn most of the time. Thank you. And on chuckgarcia.com, you can click the contact tab and reach out. But Athin, also, I want to thank you. You know, I've watched the work you do, and I think we are kindred spirits, and that what you do in the Business Growth Show, and I see it, you go to work in the service of someone else. And there's a lot of great things people could do in their profession, but no matter what it is, I don't think there's a higher calling than dedicating yourself to help others promote their business. And that's what the Business Growth Show does. And for that, I'm very grateful. I want to thank all the other, and I'm speaking for all your other guests. This is a wonderful thing you do. And to think that we are 10,000 miles apart, we are on opposite ends of the earth, and we can communicate just so fluidly, that just makes it easier. But I'm grateful to you for what you do as well.
Thank you so much, Chuck. It's been a pleasure having you on here, and love those words. It's always nice to give back wherever we can. I'm sure everyone will agree on it's awesome to give back. So thank you so much. So
you're welcome. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak to your audience today. And thank you for having me.
You're very welcome, mate. It's huge amounts of value. So, and thank you everyone for watching and listening to this show where we talk about everything on business growth. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star review. You can find me on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and YouTube as Athin Cassiotis, or visit my website, athincassiotis.com. I completely agree with you, or do I? The only way you'll know is if you tune in next time. So until next time, remember that our business grows when we learn skills and take action using them in spite of fear. So remember to design your growth and results.